So today, August 2nd, 2023, Fortune magazine put out their list of the top 500 global companies by revenue. And I want to distinguish here that this is not the most valuable companies in the world. This is the companies that put out the largest volume of cash. So companies that top the list were Walmart, Saudi Aramco, the Corporation of China, followed by Amazon. But what I want to focus on in this video is the most profitable companies. Leading the list was Saudi Aramco, then Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, and then the fifth one was the United States Postal Service. That's right, the company that drives 30-year-old vehicles and whose post offices have not been updated at all during that same amount of time, produced the fifth largest amount of profit last year of all the companies in the world. And once again, want to distinguish that this is not the most profitable. This is the companies that produce the most sheer volume of profit. So how can this be? The United States Postal Service annually posts billions of dollars of losses, and just in 2021 alone, they posted a $6.9 billion loss. So you're telling me that in 1 year, the company turned everything around and produced a $57 billion profit? You'll notice when taking a look at the top 10 that 4 of those companies are state-owned. And while I understand the scale of being a state-owned company, I mean, how does that translate into profitability? Well, a quick Google of the Postal Service's numbers led me to an article about the Postal Service Reform Act, which was enacted in April of last year. And this act did a couple of things. 1, it allowed the Postal Service to rent property. 2, it required the Postal Service to continue offering 6-day-a-week service. And 3, it eliminated the requirement to pre-fund retirement plans. And the last one I mentioned is the one I want to take a look at. So when a company offers a retirement plan, they can offer a pay-as-you-go plan like a 401k, or they can offer a fully funded plan, which can be like a pension. With a 401k plan, the employee partially pays for the retirement benefit. So the employee decides how much they're going to contribute, and then the company will match a certain percentage of that contribution. But most recently, companies have switched to just offering a flat amount to the employee, which doesn't depend on how much the employee decides to contribute. But because the plan is partially paid for by the employee, and the majority of it is really just the return on the investment of the funds in the own employee's plan, the cost of that plan to the company is significantly lower than like a fully funded plan. Now, a pension can still be like a pay-as-you-go plan, but in the case of the United States Postal Service, they were legally required to pre-fund all of their retirees' retirement benefits. In other words, say you work at the Postal Service and you retire. Say you live another 30 years and your pension is like $1,000 a month. Okay, so that means over the course of 30 years, that's like $360,000. But instead of the company being able to pay out that plan over 30 years, they were legally required to have that entire $360,000 up front when you retire. And they were required to have whatever amount they continue to owe you on hand every year. So you can see how this adds up, and the liability that the United States Postal Service had grew exponentially, being around $56.8 billion in 2020. Now, clearly, a pre-funded plan is way more expensive and pretty much insane to do nowadays, but if that's the case, why did the Postal Service still have this? Is this some obscure policy from 70 years ago? Well, not quite. As a matter of fact, the law that instituted the pre-funding requirement went into effect in 2006, so only about 17 years ago. But their reasoning was at the time was that because of the rise of the internet and because of email specifically, they were anticipating that the revenues for the Postal Service was going to dramatically decline. But they still wanted to guarantee retirees that they were going to get their full retirement benefits. They didn't want retirement funds to still be tied to this, failing company, I guess is what we would call it. So they wanted people who went to work for the Postal Service to still feel comfortable retiring there, knowing that their retirement benefits were fully guaranteed, no matter what the financial condition of the Postal Service was. Now, obviously, this was unsustainable. I mean, just in 2022 alone, the company had $80 million in revenue and had nearly $60 million of unpaid retirement liabilities, which is just insane. Now, this was obviously draining the Postal Service, and over the last couple of years, there's been some efforts to try to get laws passed to change this, not completely remove the plan, but try to fix it somehow, and of course, a pre-funded plan is basically unfixable. There's no realistic way to fund it anymore, and that's why no one has them. So finally, after years of trying, The Postal Service Reform Act of 2022 was passed by Congress and signed by President Biden in April of 2022. Now, this law did a couple of things, but obviously the biggest one was that it eliminated this pre-fund retirement plan, and the Postal Service was no longer bound to offer this. So now that the plan was eliminated, I think the follow-up question that all of us immediately have is, where did the money go? Well, as I sort of said earlier, the Postal Service was actually behind on their payments into the fund. So these missed payments show up on the balance sheet as expenses. In addition to eliminating the plan, the PSRA also relieved the Postal Service of all their missed payments that were due to the plan. So these missed payments had shown up on the balance sheet as expenses, contributing to their losses. So really what happened was that there was no cash to be moved around. Instead, Congress just sort of forgave the Postal Service for those payments, but when you eliminate billions of dollars of expenses on a balance sheet, they don't just go away. They still show up as operational income. Basically, $57.8 billion of cash wasn't created, it was eliminated. But because of the way that balance sheets work, it looked like the Postal Service made this $57.8 billion profit, which is insane. Now, of course, this was a one-time thing, and the Postal Service continues to be widely unprofitable. Just in the last 5 years, they've had losses ranging from $2 billion a year all the way up to $10 billion a year. And as the projections look forward, volumes continue to decline. The only reason their revenue continues to increase is because the Postal Service continues to raise the prices of stamps. And so as the volumes continue to decrease, it's just going to get more and more expensive to actually ship things through the USPS. So while it's sad to hear that the Postal Service being profitable is sort of fake, it is kind of nice in the mess that is the federal government to hear a story of cost reduction and improved efficiency. But at the end of the day, I don't really understand the argument behind why Fortune decided to include state-owned companies, let alone the Postal Service, in their rankings of the companies that produced the most profit in 2022, especially because the Postal Service one is just so misleading, and it kind of makes me discredit their whole list. But I think what they really wanted to do was include Saudi Aramco because of how large they are, and I guess if they did that, it would have felt wrong to leave out the others. I don't know. But what I will say is that there's always ongoing discussion of privatizing the Postal Service and some other entities.
And I think that's a discussion worth having.
And I think the fact that they're reporting their numbers is a great step maybe towards having a broader discussion, which we will have maybe in another video at some point. But with that said, I hope this was an interesting elaboration on this topic. Thank you for watching.